Well, Halloween may be more than a week away, but this is the time many people start thinking about what to wear. But what is appropriate when it comes to culture and gender is encouraged to be a part of that decision. Now, before we dive into that conversation, we have reached a Vancouver costume store to tell us what's popular this year. Jason Power is responsible for sales and marketing at the Party Bazaar in Vancouver. Good afternoon to you, Jason.
Oh, thank you for calling.
Tell us what's popular right now.
Well, for the adults, we find that the Zipster costumes are really popular. They're onesie costumes. They come in different animal themes. They're great for men and women. And, those ones are really popular, as well as the inflatable costumes. We've got cows, chickens, Godzilla, and T-Rex.
Inflatable costumes?
Yeah.
How do you even wear that?
It's got a little built-in fan that keeps the costume inflated for the whole night.
All right. And what else is popular off the shelves?
For adults, anything related to food, anything related to steampunk is really big for the hipsters. And we're finding that Wonder Woman costumes have made a real comeback because of the movie that came out this summer.
Okay. And how are things different for children and adults?
For children, it mostly is focused on superhero costumes, and then the pirates and ninjas, and then a lot of the occupations like the fireman and the construction worker, that kind of stuff.
Okay. And what costumes are more popular along gender lines? Are there costumes that are more popular?
There are actually, like I said, the Zipster ones are really big because we've got them they fit men and women, so like lions and cows and monkeys. For the women, they're more for the pandas and deer.
All right. And have you got your costume planned out?
I've got mine. I keep that a secret until the very end.
Is that right? The big reveal?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, have fun. Thank you so much for taking our call.
Okay. Thank you.
That's Jason Power, who is responsible for sales and marketing at the Party Bazaar in Vancouver. Well, we have two guests joining us now for this part of our conversation. Chim Alao is the Vice President of Equity at the University of Toronto Students' Union. Chim, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you.
And Neal Lester is the Director of Project Humanities at Arizona State University, and that's where we have reached him. And hello to you.
Good afternoon to you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Chim, to you first. We are talking about Halloween costumes and what is appropriate. Your student union is working on an education campaign about what's appropriate. Tell me about that.
So this is something that has been brought forth through the Social Justice and Equity Commission, which is a part of the University of Toronto Students' Union, and I chair it. This was a group of students who came together and they wanted to have something on cultural appropriation, so we're going to be running an education campaign through our social media. One, just to explain, what is cultural appropriation? What actually is cultural appropriation? Because even the definition is something that a lot of people aren't necessarily entirely sure about.
Right. What is cultural appropriation when we're talking about Halloween costumes?
Particularly in the context of Halloween costumes, is taking an aspect of someone's culture and identity that is not yours, and wearing and using it as a prop or a costume, something that's sacred towards something that's sacred or important towards another person's culture, and using that to be your Halloween costume for the year.
And Neal, to you now, what costumes do you find particularly concerning?
Well, I think any of the costumes that have to do with another person's identity or another group's identity, and that can be anything from tribal tattoos to blackface. So if we're going to be a black character, as we had Julianne Hough do a few years ago, one of the characters from Orange is the New Black, that's problematic. If there's anything, particularly for a group of people who have been oppressed by these same things that those who are part of the mainstream culture are trying to appropriate. So if, for example, you're going to wear one of those Jamaican dreadlock wigs, there should be reason for alarm to do that. So we're talking about ways in which dreadlocks and hairstyles and body color, skin hues are actually part of people's identities in the same way that we talk about indigenous mascots and the problems that those propose for those who are American Indian.
And what would you say to someone who might say, well, this is just a costume. I don't mean any offense by it. I'm simply trying to have fun.
Well, there's so many things wrong with that. And one has to do with I can't see your intentions. I can't know your intentions. And intentions can often be veiled in bias that we're not even conscious of. So whether you intended it or not doesn't mean that the impact has not been problematic. So I wouldn't sort of use that sort of intentional fallacy to excuse, and precisely what you said when you say, well, I was just doing it because of a costume, is my identity is not a costume. And one university in Ohio started that campaign several years ago, and I think it's still relevant today, that we cannot take people's identities. I love what the first guest said when he talked about these kinds of costumes that really didn't have anything to do with other people, but rather things. Those are the ones that are actually more creative. I mean, I myself have wanted to go as a haystack. So that's what I'm saying, is think outside the box. In many ways, these sorts of cultural appropriation exercises, when people gravitate toward these same kinds of things, whether it's Pocahontas, sexy Pocahontas, or I saw one the other night, which is in the party store. It's a grandpa and a grandma, and it was clearly young people wanting to make fun of old people. So there are all kinds of levels of appropriation for the sake of a party, for the sake of fun, that really, really impact negatively how we perceive people who are members of those groups.
I'm speaking with Neal Lester, who's the director of Project Humanities, that's based at Arizona State University, and Chim Alao, who's the vice president of equity at the University of Toronto. At 20 minutes to the hour here on BC Almanac, this is CBC Radio 1, and we are discussing Halloween costumes. What do you think of this conversation about appropriate Halloween costumes and the issue of cultural appropriation? I'd like to know what you keep in mind when you're choosing a Halloween costume. Are these issues that weigh on you as well? And what are your plans to do this year? 1-800-825-5950. That's toll free around the province. In Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733, and on your cell phone, star or pound 690. You can email us, almanac@cbc.ca, or you can tweet us at BC Almanac. And Neal, I just want to pick up on something you just said when addressing the question of intent. And you said, regardless of intent, the impact is problematic. Can you tell me about the impact? What is it?
Well, I think it's precisely what we see when we see something like Chief Illini at the University of Illinois, and this is a character, a fictitious character that just sort of jumps around during halftime to entertain the guests. It has nothing to do with the history of American Indians in Illinois, and there's nothing about the costume that recognizes the sacredness of the feathers. It's essentially for entertainment. And from my particular perspective as an African American, what's problematic about that is that it reiterates and underscores the ways in which many subordinated groups in this country have been ridiculed, mocked, made fun of, or treated as a costume, something that, I'll wear it today and then tomorrow pull it off and go back into my whiteness, if we're looking at this in terms of ethnicity and race. So if it perpetuates a stereotype, particularly against a group that is still discriminated against, who's getting credit for it? I mean, those are fundamental questions that are not about one's intentions. Because, I use the example in another exercise where I say, well, I ran a red light because I was running late. I hit somebody. I didn't intend to hit somebody, but the person hit has been hit. So it really doesn't matter what my intentions were. Now, it matters if I were deliberately trying to run over the person, but I said that I was running late, and I kind of ran through a red light. I knew it was red, but I ran through, and the other side somebody was walking, and I hit them and I killed them, or I hit them and I injured them. So the intent doesn't really help in terms of what that person has felt by the car hitting that person.
Chim Alao, I'll ask you, what's been the reaction or the response from among students to your education campaign?
So far, the response has been very positive. So the actual education campaign is going to be released in the couple of days leading up to Halloween, just to kind of keep it fairly salient as well. But from those who are involved and from those who know about it, it's been very positive. It actually started from a request by the president of the Indigenous Studies Students Union here at University of Toronto, who came to us with this request and said, I'd really like to see this. And so far, we've had some very positive responses on that. It's an issue on campus that a number of people have been dealing with and wanted to take action on for a number of years, and there's not really any other campaign like this on campus. So folks are happy to see that there is at least some action being taken in order to take steps to address the issue.
I'll ask you both, is there a point where this might go too far, you restricting what people can wear for Halloween?
Oh, my goodness, no.
No.
Why not?
I think. Our imagination is infinite, and in fact, I think that relying on stereotypes is actually quite lazy. So no, I don't think there's any slippery slope here. I think you can go to India, you can go to other places and not feel like you have to dress in a costume in order to fit in. So no, I think we always have to put on a critical lens so that we are not treating others the way we wouldn't want to be treated.
Jim, I'll let you comment on that before we go to our first caller.
I completely agree. It isn't any sort of slippery slope scenario. Halloween, in and of itself, was meant to be a time of creativity. You're meant to go and put on, a scary costume, in order and have fun from the fact of going around and parading, in something scary and fictional or something along the lines of that.
Quarter to the hour now here on BC Almanac. We are getting some calls to join the discussion about Halloween costumes, and Bob is on the line in Chilliwack. Good afternoon to you, Bob.
Hi, good afternoon. Typically you're talking about pretty much the Caucasians that are looking for or trying to avoid cultural appropriation. What about the people of other ethnic groups? What's your advice or guide for them?
Thank you for the question. Neal and Chim, he's saying, are these rules just for white people, or are they for any ethnicity that wants to wear a costume of another ethnic background?
I would say, if I can respond first, I would say that it's for any ethnicity. These aren't necessarily relegated towards just white people. And if you're a person of any ethnicity and you're planning on dressing in a Halloween costume from a culture that you're not a part of and you do not share, then you're contributing to the same problem the same way as a white person should. As a black male, I'm not going to. If I was to go and dress up, in a Native American indigenous headdress, then I would be contributing to the same problem that any other person would be doing by doing that and parading around as an Aboriginal person for Halloween.
Or extend that to, and that has been done, by the way, by some of the celebrities. Beyonce and Destiny's Child dressed up as Native Americans for one of their videos or one of their photo shoots. But I'd also say that relative to my own university, which has a blackout day related to sports and spirit, and a black student suggested that they blacken their faces and didn't quite understand the gravity and the history that's associated with that. So those who are members of a group can also participate in that. I have some concerns when I see lots of or African Americans kind of embracing Africa by wearing dashikis and other attire and not really understanding what that actually means. So I don't think it's restrictive. I think what we see most visible, though, are white people who are looking because it's cool. You wear dreadlocks because it's cool. You use the N-word with the GA because it's cool. Or you become something like Iggy Azalea. So this is not about an understanding of the culture, but rather a wearing of a costume that then you can take off at the end of the party or at the end of the day, whereas those who live that identity can't take them off so easily.
Bob, are you still there?
Yes, a First Nation could wear a First Nation, and that would be perfectly okay?
I'm not sure why that would be a problem.
Okay, just asking.
Okay.
All right, thank you for the question, Bob. Good to hear from you in Chilliwack. Michael is on the line in Langley. Hi, Michael.
Hey, how's it going?
Fine, thank you. What's your comment or question about Halloween costumes and cultural guidelines or cultural appropriation?
Well, I hope I don't put off saying all this. First, I'll start with I'm not white. I'm half black and half Italian. And I find the whole notion of cultural appropriation to be a made-up term for people who want to divide us. There's one culture on Earth. We're all humans. And I personally don't find anything wrong if one of my white buddies says, hey, I want to dress as a black guy, black guy, face for an afro. Cool, get on you. I don't find it offensive that some other culture wants to borrow or mimic mine. If anything, cool, let's talk about this. You want to learn something about my culture? You want to dress up for a day? Let's break down these BS lines, these divisions. You're Native, you're black, you're Hispanic. You know what? No, you're human, and you're human. That's all that should matter. And people like your guests that perpetuate this division, you're what's wrong with society. I know you have good intentions, but really you're doing more harm than good. We're human first. Who cares if I pretend to be Muslim and wear a hijab today? Who's it going to hurt? You know, do your hurt feelings cause you like physical pain? Can we just get over it, accept that we're all human? Or is that too much to ask?
And Michael, what do you say then to the argument that, wearing a costume simply reinforces a very small part or a stereotype of that culture, and you don't get to learn anything more, anything beyond?
I say that again. You're just perpetuating the division. Okay, of what? So I can't wear a ninja costume or samurai costume because that's appropriating Japanese culture. Let's get real. I think that too many people are too sensitive about too many subjects. And instead of talking about things, we get all up in arms, and then I'm right, and then I'm left, and we can't even see a middle ground. We're just too caught up in the BS to even talk. Why is this even an issue? They're costumes for a fun day, one day of the year. Who does it hurt? Nobody. But this division, this perpetuating hostility, this hurts. I've seen white kids get screamed at because they had dreads. What did it hurt for him to do his hair that way? Nothing. But someone felt so angry that she had to scream at him and call him all kinds of names. That is what's wrong, dividing people.
Michael, thank you for the question. I'll put that to you, Neal. What about that? Does this not perpetuate more of the division?
Well, Michael seems more agitated than we are, though. We're just calmly talking about it critically, and what I find is that people don't always put on a critical lens, and that sort of nonsense about we're all human is really problematic, because that's the equivalent of saying I don't see color, I just see you as a person, and that's what perpetuates the isms. You should see me as a person. You should actually know this is not about one's personal offense. This is about a critique on cultural awareness. And yes, all the stuff that he says is precisely what's wrong with people doing what they're doing is, I want to just have fun for one day. Well, ask those people who have been told that they can't have a job because they have dreadlocks, or ask those people who have not been admitted into a public space because of the way their hair is, and then extend that to the people who are historically discriminated today because of these traits.
Isn't that placing so much,
though? Half black and half white is not an issue. The question is, how is he perceived by the society, not how he personally. I mean, that's how you talk about privilege and bias. It's not about you personally, and he seems to be internalizing that personally.
Isn't that pardon me, when you talk about all the history and all the struggles that people of color do face, are you not are not placing so much pressure on what is just a costume in the end? And I think from his point of view, it's imitation. It may be the best form of flattery.
It's not. It's stealing and exploiting.
I think
there's nothing about imitation. It's stealing and exploiting, especially when people don't get credit for what they have produced. And I can say that relative to music that Elvis Presley produced. I can say that according to Iggy Azalea. I can talk about a number of people who have been given credit. Betty Boop, for example, was a black woman, but we don't know that. Jack Daniels recipe for liquor was stolen from a black slave. He was never getting credit for it. So this is beyond being cool and doing something for a day. Cultural appropriation is part of our American history.
Jim, you wanted to get in there. Jim, you wanted to get in there as well?
I definitely agree with what Neal's been saying. Michael comes in from a perspective of, I don't take offense to this. I think you're blowing it out of proportion. Why you're creating more division. But I think even just in that statement of itself, it's coming from the my. Michael individually doesn't take offense to it, and that's his own personal capacity to be able to deal with this. There's some things that are cultural appropriative towards my particular race that I don't necessarily take offense to, but that's just my own personal capacity. When you're looking at the macro level, when you're looking at in the institutional level, when you're looking at this society of people, then yes, it's multiple people will take offense to this because of the historical implications surrounding it, because of the fact that they have to have this lived experience every single day for even embracing their culture. I know students who used to be made fun of for dressing in traditional garb when they went to school, and they used to laugh at them. Oh, why are you wearing at that? But then you have those same people who are laughing at them dressing up in those traditional garbs as a Halloween costume, as something to have fun in, as something to mimic or to caricature. When these things can be particularly important towards another nation's society and history.
Okay, I just like to get another caller, and Mike is calling us from Cranbrook. Hi, Mike.
Hi there. I think that I share some of the opinions of the last caller. One of the things you brought up was that there were instances where specific individuals were wronged, taken advantage of, and certainly that should be addressed. But the idea that a racial group should have exclusive rights to something simply because a member of their race invented it, I think that's a dangerous idea. Like, if you extended that to, what white people have invented and said, all right, well, other racial groups are not allowed to use this technology or whatnot, I think it immediately you start to see where that's a problem. And then what you're asking is that you have the power to identify which groups have been historically wronged, and to the extent that you believe justifies you not allowing other racial groups to do that.
But if certain groups have faced racism and have faced that kind of discrimination and oppression, and certain elements of their culture are taken and put into a costume that doesn't explain anything in terms of what their actual culture is.
But who is the one that's stating at what point this is a level of historical wrong that makes it so other racial groups are not allowed to use something they might be, offended by? And how do you measure that? And the people who are saying they should be given the power to determine which costumes and which things are offensive enough, those are the people I'm worried about, like the guests here. That's concerning. That's the doorway to tyranny once you sort of give that any sort of legal power.
Okay,
and
Mike,
that's where I'm concerned about this going in that direction.
All right, Mike, thank you for the call. I'll let you respond, Neal.
First of all, it doesn't have any legal sense. I mean, nobody's going to arrest you for wearing a blackface costume. So let's not be hyperbolic about that. What we can say is this is more about critical self-policing. You can use the N-word as much as you want. The question is, are there social consequences to that? And there is no slippery slope here. There is absolutely no reason to say that we can't look historically at how African Americans have been treated in America, and the fact that T.D. Rice, a white man, decided he was going to look at a slave and dress like a slave in blackface and create a tradition that we now see as an entertainment. So there is no slippery slope here. When we're taking indigenous mascots, and we know, for example, that team in Washington, the NFL team, that name has to do with the genocide of American Indians in this country and scalping them and getting money for babies, adults, and women and children. So it's naive to not be historically aware of what these are coming out of. And I wish people would move away from this notion of what people are personally offended by. This is a conversation about privilege, and privilege is not about individuals, although individuals are affected by it. These are systems that continue to be perpetuated by people who don't put on a critical lens.
Chim, I'm just going to ask one question of you. We have an email from Suzanne who writes, please, why don't we give Halloween back to the children and respect their innocence? Parents should use the opportunity to discuss their choices with them if their choice seems insensitive. I only have a minute left, Chim, but what about that? What about the conversation that a parent should have with their child?
No, yeah, and I think this is actually a perfect time to have those conversations with your children. Not necessarily just on what is cultural appropriation, why might this Halloween costume be bad, but also what culture is, what cultural appreciation is, and how that differs. And having conversations of, you want to partake, you want to do it because you want to partake in their culture. There are plenty of other ways to be able to do that, whether it be getting involved, whether it be being immersed in the culture, whether it be reading out works. And this is a perfect time to be able to do that and instill that in children, so that way they have this understanding going off into the future. So I would use this as an opportunity to open that discussion and to actually just talk to your children and address the issues of these historical factors.
One of our callers said, why don't we talk about this? And we are talking about it. Thank you so much for the conversation this afternoon. Neal Lester at Arizona State University and Chim Alao at the University of Toronto's Student Union.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.